Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to Social Confoes. I'm your host, Diego, together with my co-host, Shanluk. Shanluk, I like the decorations in the back.
Yeah, so it's November and like I could show you the whole office, but there's already Christmas decoration up. And I got a little confused when my colleagues started doing that, but they were like, "Nope, it's already Christmas time." And I'm like, "It's November. We even have the World Cup first," but it didn't matter to them. So Christmas decorations are up, and I think there's slowly gonna be piles of things underneath the Christmas trees as well as we get towards Christmas. So very joyful experience. I
Right,
can't I can't say anything negative about it, just that it's just early. But aside from that, the experience is a very positive one.
right. Even the World Cup is something that's not very common this year,
Oh,
so
it's really
that's
weird.
interesting.
It's really weird, and it's 7 o'clock. Our guests might even have it worse because that it's even earlier in the U.S. But like we had to watch Argentina this morning at 7 a.m. lose to Saudi Arabia, which was insane, but well deserved victory for Saudi Arabia as well. So it's interesting. World Cup in November and in December, it's definitely a different experience. Uh, but I think it's good. It gives us a little bit more of an idea what is possible. I think that's also a topic that we're gonna touch upon a lot today, that we're kind of like put in a certain structure, as in this is the way it's supposed to be without even considering other options. And I think that's something that it's good to take us a little bit out of the comfort zone, because
So
sometimes, like with a Christmas decoration, it actually kind of works as well.
awesome. With that being said, what are we talking about today and who do we have with us? I know there's some book stuff coming. We've had a lot of slew of guests introducing their books, but what's so different about today's?
So I'm gonna do a short introduction on Jessie, because I the thing that really interests me about Jessie is that she's very involved with children in general, but also with special needs, and she has put out a couple of children's books. And these aren't your ordinary children's books. These are really children's books that make you think a little bit. And I'm trying not to spoil anything what the books are about. So without further ado, let's bring on Jessie. Welcome to Social Conflict, Jessie.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Yes, we're doing a little bit of an earlier show, so Raul is saying, "Hey guys, I'm still it's still working time, but as always, you're able to watch this episode or listen to this on all streaming platforms as well." And Jesse, without revealing yet what the children's books are about, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and what were the things that you enjoyed doing when you were younger?
Well, I was born in Bakersfield, California, and I moved later in time when I was like 4 years old to Colorado and kind of lived half and half in the area because I was a child with special needs with expressive language disorder. So my summers were spent in California doing ABCs 1, 2, 3, math problems, all the fun stuff. And some of my bribery was like SeaWorld or Disneyland, or I'd just get really cool toys. Um, I guess majority of my life has now been in Colorado, but I did live back in California again for a while, and then Florida. I've been a couple places. Um, but what led to kind of my children's book stories, each one I try to reach kids with special needs and anyone just learning to read, because I was one of those children that couldn't read. I had to sit in bed, lay in bed with my mom, and we'd take turns reading, and she'd sit with me. Even when I threw the book and got frustrated and didn't want to do it anymore, she would still go, "Here we go," because she's a special ed teacher. And I now, if we go to present day, I work in a school setting with kids with special needs and an after school program / summer, spring, winter camp thing of kids with special needs. So special needs is a part of my everyday life.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm really curious to know because it started with reading, right? Getting a hang of reading, learning to read. I'm curious to know like how that transitioned into you now writing. Is it like do you write differently, or how does that having experienced that learning curve, that learning process as a child, you now writing books for children with special needs or children in general?
For me, honestly, I started writing poetry when I was, I guess, between 5 and 6 years old. I don't know the exact age. In my biography, I say 6, but I honestly don't know whether it was 5 or 6 I wrote my first poem. And in my poetry book is my first poem. And like Who You Are, which is one of my books, sprung from a poem in order to become that book. But I write simple. Even my poetry is simple, so it can still reach an adult with special needs. It's still general public, anyone who's learning to read. I write simple. I don't focus on what I'm doing. I just take, oh, hey, this could be a story. If I see it fits, like, if I can introduce one of my books, Super Gay
Yeah, sure.
was
Go ahead.
Okay. Super
Yeah.
Gay was also a poem before it became a book. I had to add a lot to it because it actually went through a grueling process of review before the review. And I added pages, so it's not quite the same poem it was originally, versus Who You Are is still the poem was originally, just has a character name in it, only difference.
Okay. So just to take us a little bit back, when you were young and you had struggled with reading, so in the end, did your mother figure out what the issue was or what the thing was that was struggling you were struggling with or was holding you back?
She knew something was wrong, just coming from her standpoint, being a teacher of special education. So she talked to my kindergarten teacher who had me go through kindergarten twice, and I went through a bunch of testing. And then they decided, hey, you have expressive language disorder. You need to be in special needs classroom. So in a special needs classroom, at least when I was there, it's changed since there wasn't a difference between like those who are mentally challenged and someone with a language or a learning, because mine was language and learning. Um, they were all combined. So we would get the same treatment. It would be the same therapy through the day, the same everything, same cue cards. It wasn't any different until I hit 5th grade because I was in it majority of my life through kindergarten to even college. I still was within the special education system and still was getting help outside of places because yes, I can read. I still struggle with like grammar and spelling, but funny enough, like in the classroom that I work in and have worked in, there's Spanish speakers and who have language delays too. I tend to understand them better than your average person or even just a Spanish speaker themselves or someone who, I don't know. I guess that's just the way it ended up going, being a person lack thereof language.
Well, well, yeah, communication and language is just the way to convey message, and our the way we communicate. Words is just a part of it. Language, like spoken language, is just one part of it. So, have you maybe found that your experience has given you, as you said, the Spanish teacher, you can understand where they're coming from and try to understand that better. Have you gained an advantage or insight on, the other types of way we signal or communicate aside from spoken language to help you within your communication?
Guess it's more of I'm able to understand their perspective because I grew up. You still get the same treatment, even if you're a Spanish speaker. There's programs, and if you speak French or any other language, but sometimes others are still behind. And to me, I feel like being someone who has gone through the ringer of special education, you still get kind of put into those classes that I just have an understanding of I've been there and I get it. And they gravitate towards me naturally. It's not a force. It's a, oh, coming to you.
So what would you consider the biggest misconception about special needs and special needs classes?
Uh, well, number one is thinking that they're stupid. And number two is the misconception of believing they can't do the same thing you can do. I've proven a lot of people wrong. I was told I would never be able to write a book. I have a poetry book, 3 children's books out right now. I do have a Spanish version in the works of Who You Are coming out. They're right there. That's going against the grain. And there's some wonderful advocacy adults out there that are special needs, like Alice Wong. She's an Asian woman who is special needs, but she's an activist. She's has 2 books out. One she had a bunch of writers go, and the other one's just her life story, a memoir, which I still have to read, but I love her so much. She's fighting for rights that you don't hear about. It's like all under the radar because you assume if someone's in a wheelchair, oh, they can't do that. If someone has a speech delay, which I technically count in that category, they can't have a conversation with anyone. There's so much that I guess people have preconceived notions about and don't educate themselves about it, that it's kind of upsetting sometimes because you have to fight that, even well-educated educators. I dealt with that last year in a school setting I was in. Even they weren't educated enough. The one setting I'm in now is very educated educators,
Okay.
so it's nice to be around educators that do educate themselves. But yeah, it's important to do that. But yeah.
It's interesting, no, because like with a lot of we're from quite a small community. It's just over 500,000, and what we often see here is that the biggest advocates for these special needs programs are often the parents of the children that actually have somebody that is in a special needs, and it can be a variety of things. Like it could even be autism or something like something a less familiar. Uh, Special needs. And I was wondering, like, as you grow older, because you've seen a couple of different generations now and different decades, have you noticed that in the US there is gradually more shift towards awareness and better understanding of different kind of special needs? And like you mentioned in the program in the beginning, like when you grew up, everybody was just put into one class, and it's like, okay, they need a fix, sort of, instead of, okay, this is a different kind of special needs than the other person. So do you feel like there's growth in that sense of awareness? And also, is there also uh, from a more national perspective, is there a body or an organization that helps out, aside from the parents who are the first ones to seek help?
I feel like there is education out there, but not enough. Like, yes, it's there, but it's still to under the radar extent. Like, you might hear a little bit about it. Like, even I know the LGBTQIA community, which I'm also a part of, is trying to spread more awareness within that too. But it's taken decades to make it this far, and still there isn't enough. Yes, parents are part of the step up, but they're not the only ones. Teachers are too. And actually, my after school organization I'm a part of, Imagine Colorado, they do a great job advocating and educating. So if we go, because that's about going out into the public, you really get to see a good point of view of how well educated people are. And most are not and will not listen to you in public if you're asking them to, hey, can you just not do this right now? I can handle this even with a badge. They don't always listen because people are still afraid of what they don't understand, because someone can be dangerously cognitively delayed or anything like that and just be walking around because they need to walk around. You don't hear about the number one you hear about, honestly, is autism, and that's not the only one in existence. I bet you never heard about mine. Excessive language disorder. There's a lot out there a lot of people have not heard about. There's even a lot I haven't heard about that I'm still educating myself about, because people don't understand a child, whether they see themselves as disabled or not. That's up to them. That's their own individual choice. I personally don't see myself that way. They get put in a category automatically that kind of not too many people are educated in. So I'm trying to think of one of the ones no one's really heard about besides my own. Because you have a combination of mental health, learning, and just disability. I'm going to do that. Disability. So someone in a wheelchair is the only example I can think of because that's the most common one people see. But there are people in a wheelchair that can get up and walk. I've seen on TikTok, which I'm on the side of, which is special needs disabled TikTok. I've seen trying to educate, but you don't get as many views on there or as many likes or as anything. So just trying to get the education out there is hard in the first place.
So you just mentioned TikTok, and I think before we started, you also mentioned, you're on TikTok as well, pushing your book content on there. So from an educator's perspective, and especially a special needs educator, how do you see the role in social media and with your platform of choice, TikTok, play out in that process of educating children and just the populace in general about the topics you're talking about, the role of social media?
I think it plays a really important role. I've heard both sides, even from other educators and just people I work with every day. But I feel it's important because you can spread more awareness on social media. You can reach more people from everywhere, not just the United States. And you actually get to see the statistics of who you're reaching. Like on YouTube, I was surprised to see India and India on my books too. I got to see statistics there. I didn't expect that. The UK and United States. It's just nice to really get it out there because you don't know the education system there or how much they know. All I know is the United States. That's my only educated area. And I'd like to be more widespread for when I do social media. And as more of my books come out, I would like to help with the awareness of spreading. So I'm still continuously learning myself and educating myself to better myself and reaching every generation and everyone.
Is there a particular reason you chose to go with TikTok and YouTube first compared to something more mainstream like Facebook?
Facebook, honestly, kind of is a dead system, depending. Like, it's great for if you're doing like online teaching and actually doing groups, but I'm not really into doing that. If I do, it's just going to be on my website, which also goes towards special needs and creators and all the little people, I guess you count as those that are kind of there but not fully. But I just don't feel like Facebook's a great platform for at least what I do. It's probably great for other people, but it's not going to reach who I want to reach. And TikTok reaches whoever is watching, and you never know who's watching. And YouTube is the same way. You just have to know YouTube algorithm. That's the only harder part on that. Other than that, TikTok, you don't need an algorithm. Just random people can watch.
Now, when that's interesting that you mentioned, because you mentioned India, the UK. So I was wondering, now that of course your content is seen by like multiple countries, and of course English is kind of like a common language in the rest of the world, so most people are able to listen to what you're saying. Uh, has there been like a moment where you were surprised to hear like somebody from another country be like, "Hey, it's the same here," or that you would have somebody saying like, "Hey, yeah, that's not normal in our country." Have you experienced that kind of situation already?
Not yet, but I would love to because that brings an open conversation and more learning. So I would love that to happen, honestly, but it hasn't happened yet. I've only had recently, which I haven't known how to reply to yet, someone from Africa that wants to purchase my books, but you can't get it sent over there. So I'm trying to come up with a solution where I can get it to this individual because they want to purchase my books. So I'm
Oh, that's pretty
not.
cool. Yeah, well, we have that same problem in Suriname. It's not the easiest road. You have to have a PO box, and then you have to get it yourself from the US to here, which in some cases you pay more than the actual book to get it transported. But it's very interesting that you mentioned the part about there's a whole different community that we don't know about. For instance, I've done a session with the deaf community in Suriname, and about social media, and they're like things that I never thought of that were important to them, because they don't hear the sound of anything that I don't value as much. And when you realize and you watch social media from their perspective, you realize how different they think about certain things. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there for people. You've mainly spoken about the speaking disorder. So how much are those books? How much are your books geared towards that specific special needs versus other special needs as well?
It's honestly geared towards everyone with special needs. I work with deaf too. Uh, Deaf just is, I really want to be able to reach them. So I'm working on, like, even for my TikToks, I haven't made it there, even YouTube too, just having words written on the screen. Thankfully, my books do work for someone who's deaf because all you do is read the pages. If they have any advice, I will happily take it because it's coming directly from them. Other than that, yeah, it's for everyone. It's not specific group of special needs or disabled people. It's everyone. It can be the 40-year-old with Down syndrome, or it can be someone who's deaf that just wants to read. It's simple reading, but it teaches you still. There's still phonetics within there, which is a huge part of the learning system, which I didn't even realize I did. That just naturally happened. And then when
Yeah,
I got in
because that
school,
was going to be my question. Like, how did you get inspired to, to experiment with those kind of cognitive skill sets to kind of like push and motivate people to do a little bit more? Like, how do you incorporate that in the books?
I just write. So I just literally do my poetry, like Who You Are, which will go more in depth later in time, just not at this time I will. Who You Are was just created by someone pretty much telling me who to be, which you do get that even in special needs. You get told who to be instead of being whoever you want to be, whoever that might be. And that poem came and sprung. And then honestly, Super Gay, because I am part of the LGBTQI community, I'm part of multiple communities, which is normal for anyone of special needs. I wanted to talk about pronouns, but I didn't want to do it in the way that everyone else did it. It just was a poem that was inspired by my friends. One of them I actually work with that I still count as a good friend. She's part of Imagine and Imagine Colorado. And then the other one, I worked with at Amazon, and he just called me super gay when I went to my first parade. And so, as a joke, I definitely have him thank you in there because he helped inspire it. And the outfit that is seen on Super Gay is the same outfit I wore, with exception of SG on it the day of the parade. And he was funny because he just went, "You're super gay," and I just kept on joking throughout the day, doing flights if I'm super gay to the rescue. And then I actually wrote the poem that night, and then I started the editing, and I worked really hard to find an illustrator that was meeting the needs that I wanted specifically for the book. I even sent out a wanted page, and I looked at hundreds of artists, and I asked for an example besides the one they showed me on only 3 specific ones. I had to cut it down to 3. And then from there, I tested out each one to see how they were going to do the cover and if they listened to what I said, because I had a specific image in mind, and only one met those needs and was easygoing. And that will be the same illustrator for the rest of the series, just like my other book, Who You Are, same illustrator.
So we've talked about like writing, and you just mentioned illustrations. You got inspired. Basically, you work with an illustrator as well. So especially when it comes to writing for children, like that visual element helps a lot to convey meaning to the words you're reading as well. So over the years, or like what's different, because you said your focus now is writing for children, but you you kind of can branch out into any direction. So what's different for writing for children compared to if you would write a fantasy or for an older age group?
Well, right now I'm in the works of a young adult for LGBTQIA, and the only difference is words. Honestly, there's more words versus if you're writing for children, less words are better, unless you're doing like a chapter book for an older child. But I don't write necessarily for the older child unless they have a need there and need it simple. So more words and you do more descriptions is about the difference, because I'm also writing a memoir of my time in a cult, but that will be out much later in time. Anyway.
That's an interesting title drop there.
Yeah, so now I really, because that's also something we haven't touched upon yet today. You also studied psychology, and it's a funny thing because I joke around with a friend of mine, because she was always interested in like how other people thought, and she ended up doing psychology. So I was like, oh, so basically you wanted to research yourself, kind of the same fun story they push back at me when I talk about I studied leisure studies. So they're like, oh, so you know how to spend your leisure time quite well. I was like, yeah, sure. But in with psychology, it's really when you combine the psychology with the special needs. Um, what are there certain characteristics or things that you notice? Like, for instance, are you more vulnerable to join a cult when your special needs, or is that completely not connected whatsoever?
I can debunk that pretty fast. Anyone is susceptible to a cult, so anyone. You don't have to be special needs. You don't have to have anything. You just have to have a willingness. Sometimes it can be to helping others. Sometimes it can be just a willingness to, which I believe large percentage, unless you're a narcissist, which most cults are run by narcissists. Um, Again, unless you're a narcissist. So you'll be the one running the cult if you're the narcissist. But most people are prone. Well, everyone is prone. There's no one that can't be prone. Even the president of the United States can be prone to joining a cult. And sadly, in the United States, we have thousands and thousands. I think it's up to like 90,000 cults running in today's world. So cults can literally be a business. Like WeWork, that was a cult. It can run like a business. It can be of church relations. Cults, sadly, we only do the stereotype of church relations. Cult can be anything.
Yeah, well,
It can be online. It can be
sometimes
offline.
helps. Legislation helps sometimes as well, facilitating the cults as well. So that's also it's also well, it's there's pluses and minuses. I mean, on one side you have a lot more freedom. On the other side, it also creates structures where these kind of things are pretty much possible, I guess.
But it's not safe. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Legislation hasn't done anything. There's a law that I've been watching to get passed about coercion in general that hasn't passed. The only one that can ever get a cult is if there's abuse happening or if it's a sex cult. That's the only way you'll ever get caught. So you can literally get away with murder. So to me, it's not handled. I don't care what anyone says. I've educated myself and I've been there myself. There's
Unfortunately, I just watched a Netflix series on that. So interesting that you brought that up. So a quick question from one of our viewers is, at what point, how did you know this is your passion? Or at what point in life did you realize like, hey, this is something that I want to do for the rest of my life?
The second I was told I can't is the second that this passion kind of hit. I became obsessed with reading, writing, and then I started my own business actually longer ago than it shows on any of my profile pages, but like 15 years ago at least. I started my publishing company by a different name. And I just want to be able to help those that want to write, whether they're verbal, nonverbal, deaf, blind. I don't care. I want their stories out there because Alice Wong is the only one of special needs right now that I'm aware of that's doing well within the writing business. I guess besides myself too, within the writing business and sending the message and educating others on it. And I want more out there. There's thousands and millions of stories untouched right now.
You just mentioned you started your own publishing company. Was this did you publish your first book before that or after that, or what's your first book through your own publishing company?
Sadly, it was through the cult. But if I go over the rewrite, it would be my poetry book. It was my first, The Lit Soul, My Journey Back to Faith.
Right.
Because
And
you'll
like,
still sadly see it on the internet, so I can't get past that. There you go.
and like how seeing it from a publisher side, like what challenges did you see for writers on getting their work out there from a publishing standpoint, that you kind of like, I really want to help these creators, these writers, get their stories, their messages published. Like what was your approach to publishing?
Well, do it first is my approach. That's why you see me going in many different genres. Because for one, I do get bored staying in one category. You can even tell by the fact of, can I show my other books or should I wait?
Oh
You
no,
can show any
go
book.
ahead. Yeah.
You can show any book. Go ahead.
This
We
is
had
your show.
yeah. So last week we had somebody on who was actually a professor who also has written a novel. So I mean, like it goes all spectrum. So feel free to share whatever you want.
Okay. Well, Colorless, which is out today, which is part of the Who You Are series.
Out today,
I
as
remember.
in you, like out to the public, like it's a new.
It's a new. It came out literally today. It's funny that I chose the podcast today, but this is
Awesome,
out
awesome.
today.
We'll plug it in as well.
Okay. So yeah, if you look at this, which there'll still be a third book to it. This illustration, story-wise, I count it as my straight-looking story, so she's not straight. We go from here, and then do you see the difference in just writing that from here? Because this is like a comic style children's series. It's a series, though, just like Who You Are is a series. But the styles are different. I don't like staying, because even, well, a lot of people with special needs, a lot of people in general can't stay. Or you can use my Gemini-ness. Some people might use that as an excuse, but it's really not. I just don't like staying straight on the same boring thing, because I get bored too, and I want to write what I'm passionate about and what I think others will be passionate about too.
So where does it start? Because you mentioned you get a lot from poetry. So do all books start off as poems and then you gradually build them up from there, or are there other instances where you had a different approach as well?
Actually, the book out today was a different approach, because Super Gay and Who You Are poetry based. This one was just from my head. It's about Black Lives Matter. I wrote it the day of, so it was in 2020 when I wrote it. I wrote it about, I don't know the day that the march happened on Washington and a couple other areas in 2020 during COVID, kind of the Black Lives Matter march. I thought in my head, so how would a child see this? So I took my main character, Jalen from Who You Are, and sadly, which I saw on TikTok, I'm not well rhetoric in that area, I did name my main male Black character Martin, but I couldn't come up with a name. But we also have Martin Luther King Jr. actually in the book, so I didn't mean to do that. I learned after the fact that it was already published, but I'm sticking with it. My mistake. But it still gets the perspective in there, and it kind of shows coming together as children.
And it's interesting because I'm going to talk from my own personal experience. I was colorblind until I was 18. Like for instance, we in Suriname, we grew up with a lot of different cultures. So we're known for having a synagogue next to a mosque. We're known to having big influence from India, from Indonesia, from African countries, from Europe. So we have like a melting pot. Like that's what Suriname's known for. And of course, there's at a certain point, there's always institutional racism. But for us, it's a little bit far away because after slavery was abolished, we got migrant workers from different countries from all these different countries, and they've lived together for over 100 years. And of course, there is a cultural and ethnical power struggle among the biggest groups, but the smaller groups, they have lived like this forever. So when I was around 18, I was kind of colorblind. So I wasn't very much aware that there was racial tension between different races. And then I went to study in the Netherlands, where still was a predominant race compared to the others. And there was a clear distinction between the predominant race, which was uh, the whites, basically the Dutch, and others, immigrants, and others from coming from outside. And there were actually specific names to distinguish them. And it really was a thought process for me. Um, but until I was 18 years old, I was colorblind. So it's very interesting that you mentioned like what's the perspective from for a child, because for a child the only way that they make a racial distinction is somebody put it in their head that there has to be a racial distinction. So it's really interesting on to see how that kind of changes the perspective of how it's done. So I'm honestly really interested to read more about in the book. So could you tell us a little bit, without spoiling the story, a little bit more about Colorless?
Well, Jalen, the main character, so right there. Well, they're both main. That's why they're both on here. But Jalen is the one carrying the series. She is on social media. Is kind of how it begins, and you see the march happening and the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and she takes that to heart. And it kind of leads into I have a teacher in there because that's important to me. I've grown up with teachers and teach myself. I've claimed that position. But she just internalizes it and wants to better educate herself. And she has a friend who is Martin. Again, I apologize for the name. But she does. Well, on TikTok, literally,
Well,
there was
yeah,
people ranting about that.
yeah. I think this is one, like when it comes to fictional stories, even if it's part fiction, the hardest thing I think for a writer is to come up with names.
Yes.
And I was in a writing room like a couple of weeks back where a writer was like, "Hey, I think I messed up the chronological order because he was writing multiple books at the time, and he realized that in an earlier book he had already given a certain character a certain name, so he could in a newer version not change it around. So it's like, whoa, that sounds really complex, and that's why I only write nonfiction, because that would be so much of a headache. But I can completely understand. If I think about Martin, there's two Martins I think about. One is my friend who has a restaurant next door, and the other one is Martin Lawrence, the actor. Those are kind of the twos that the first I wouldn't even consider Martin Luther King before those two. So it's interesting to see how kind of your personal reference kind of shapes what you think when you hear a certain name. But having both Martin Luther King and Martin, the character in the book, I can totally understand why people will get that confused.
Yeah. And, well, I'm glad that you think of that, honestly. I'm hoping other people have people they're close to that they think of first. Because Martin, that is all I could think of in the moment, and I wanted to get the story out as soon as possible. It just took me a couple years to get all the illustrations done because my illustrator, she takes a lot of time. She's actually over in Europe. I have an American illustrator for Super Gay, but for my Who You Are series, she's over in Europe, and she takes a week or two just to do one illustration. So it can take a year to 2 years just to get the book out. With Super Gay, it took 6 months or less because it takes 2 days to 3 days at most, sometimes a week, depending on how things are going with the artist. But it always is based off of first editors, which can take, some editors I've had take a week, some editors take a month. So it really depends on the editor, which I try to stay consistent in the same one. Like I found one that I really like who also edits all my Medium articles. I literally try to stick with people I like and people that just I work well with. But yeah, the name right.
So quickly to continue on that note, another fewer question. How do you keep motivating yourself to finish the writing, and how does it feel after you've done writing? How, because today, for instance, your new book is out. So how does it feel? How does it feel to have a new book out on Amazon, a new book available for purchase? What's the feeling?
It feels really good. Honestly, it's therapy for me when I write. So whenever I finish, even if it hasn't gone through editing, illustration, everything that it takes to get a book out there, I just feel really good and I feel really energetic. Like a lot of people I work with might be able to tell the difference. I don't know. I've never asked them, but I tend to be full of more energy all day and all night. Sadly, I get lack of sleep because of how good I feel. And that can last up to a week for myself, just finishing writing. But then I tend to write throughout the week because it is therapy for me. So if I need my natural high, I'll just write, honestly. And my motivation to keep me writing is the fact that I love writing. It's part of the way I communicate to people. That's how I started my communication, was poetry. When I was 5 or 6 years old, when I couldn't do a simple sentence of, "Hi, how are you today?" That was hard for me. So a poem was easier for me to talk to someone versus actually talking to them. Just like I prefer text when I talk to people. I prefer having still that.
Have there been any writers' poems that kind of influenced the way you approach your writing, or kind of like, yeah, basically that inspired you?
Yeah, I have I'm obsessed with Shakespeare, but Shakespeare's not
Shakespeare.
our today writer. Alice Wong would be one for me if I have to go with today. And also, who else? I have a couple. His name is Matthew. I don't remember the rest of it, but he died early in his life. He actually had his sister died early too. He wrote huge poems just about being a helper of God. I used to have them, but I was part of the Marshall Fire, so a lot of stuff I had I don't have anymore, so I can't show you physically the book.
Yeah.
But he had a whole poetry series where he just writes about helping others and spreading awareness. And yeah.
I'm actually curious about Shakespeare because Shakespeare's very
Yeah,
renowned. You learn about that last time I was high school English class. You need to read
it's
a
really
play
old
or
English as
something. It's
well. So
very old
not
English.
really.
So I'm curious to
Yeah.
know with that because the words aren't easy as well. So like, what about Shakespeare kind of intrigued you or like influenced you?
Well, first being the first gay person in history that wasn't recognized as gay until way after his death. And he had women acting on stage anyways. He didn't care. His lineage gave him a play stage. Again, obsessed. I know a lot of facts about him. He had women acting as men before women acting as men happened. He was an innovator, and for some reason, he was the first piece of literature I ever understood. Funny enough, that was the first thing I could read. I couldn't
Very
read all the
interesting.
special needs books, so I did become obsessed. I still am, not as hardcore as I used to be, but I still am obsessed. So anytime anyone brings up Shakespeare, I don't shut up. But
Okay,
there you go.
let's test it. Favorite Shakespeare story.
Favorite?
Yeah.
It's gonna be A Midsummer's Night Dream and Much Ado About Nothing.
Okay.
Those are the two.
Yeah. Okay. Much Ado About Nothing is definitely also on top of my list. I had a hard time with reading for different reasons than yours, but I also had a hard time with reading. And for me, it was you're kind of pushed through the education system to read certain type of books. So in high school, we had like different categories, and for your exam, you would have to read three. You're only allowed three bestsellers, and then three had to be African Caribbean, and three had to be I think classics, so like Shakespeare and other kind of books, and then the three were a different category, European or American. and I didn't like the books. Like up until that point, I hadn't finished a complete book because I they were boring me. And the biggest problem was like you could get like small like online you could find like summaries, but of course for the African Caribbean books there were no summaries because there was nobody who wrote a summary on Caribbean books that was free available online. So I
Yeah,
heavily
pre-social
struggled.
media.
Yeah, I this is all pre-social media, so I heavily struggled with getting my grade up because when it came to those books hadn't I hadn't read them. And then after I graduated high school, I came into touch with Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian writer, and
Alchemist,
and
right?
I just kept reading all his book like one by one. I kept reading them. Similar experience with what's the Canadian writer again? Diego. Um,
Do you have a book name?
uh,
I'm not too well versed in authors.
uh, David and
Especially
Goliath. Outliers. Malcolm Gladwell.
Malcolm Gladwell,
Malcolm
yeah.
Gladwell. Very similar experience. So I also feel like there's certain books that certain writing styles that personally you enjoy more. So it's really interesting for you from you to hear that actually it was Shakespeare which kind of was the one that you had most affinity with, and which kind of leads me to my final question: how much does music play a role in this? Is there a connection as well with music and writing and reading?
Yes, absolutely. Because poetry can become music. I'm working on that side of things too. Not fully yet. But poetry, music is still the same exact thing as if you were to write a book. You could literally, if you write poetry or anything, you can write lyrics. That's lyrics. Ultimately, if you write, you do everything we do today, from what you watch on TV, what you listen to. There's even musical notes that once you learn how to scribe and write those, you're writing ultimately. And my whole goal is to get everyone, special needs or people that own their own businesses or are, I don't know, like voice actors. I know that's part of my categories that I'm aiming towards too, that want to write their story, whether that's musically or in a book. It doesn't always have to be a book or a TV series or something. That's just a way of going, hi, how are you today? That's a way of expressing yourself. Like Dana Terrace, she has the Owl House, which is the first LGBTQIA children's series. She expresses her own self, and even just like Shakespeare did in all his plays, she puts herself in the animated series for little small roles. Shakespeare did that too on stage. So I really like her as a everything writer, and Lizzie Jane as a writer of music. She's in the EDM world, so you might not have heard of her, but Lizzie Jane, all the way, who's also a friend.
Now I still have I have one more, um, because you're talking about also writing a biography, autobiography, right? So is that gonna be in poem style or is that gonna be like a traditional book?
It's traditional. Like Medium that I also write on, which are a bunch of articles, is definitely in traditional form. And the biography is traditional form. I just have never written my own memoir before, so it's a learning curve for me right now. Just like the YA book, both learning curves right now. We'll see how they end up, but everyone will definitely get informed when it comes out. But it's a learning curve. But if I feel like I want to be able to teach everyone who wants to tell their story, especially those with special needs, voices that aren't out there yet, whether they want to do it in memoir form, young adult, fantasy, children's books, I need to write it myself so I can be able to go, hey, this is what I've learned. This is where you shouldn't go, and help them. That's my ultimate goal, is to be able to do that. So I'm learning right now.
Are there any books or books on your wish list that you're currently reading or wanting to read, like at the moment, like top three?
Top 3. Well, I really want to read right now Year of the Tiger by Alice Wong. I have it on my list, but I'm right now reading Clementine, which is written by the same writers of I can't think of the popular show, but Zombies. But it's
Zombies?
LGBTQIA. Yeah, about people killing zombies and stuff. I don't remember the name of it, but Clementine is the name of the graphic novel I'm reading, which is meant for the LGBTQIA community. I really want to read more books there. I've only gotten to so many so far. I think I've read maybe 10 so far. I'm trying to get better in my rhetoric of even that, since I am a part of it and didn't come out until 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm getting myself better educated there at the same time so I can get to everyone.
Interesting. And how much, as a writer yourself, would you say you read? How many books do you read per year on average? Like
30 to 40. I'm a pretty slow reader, so I don't read fast. That's including
But
children's
it's
books, by the
still
way. 30 to
impressive.
40.
It's still impressive.
That's
It's
like-
still hell impressive. It really is. Yeah.
I got like maybe 5 or
Yeah,
6, but that's like
I can't even commit to one book a month, so it's very impressive.
And are these spread across genres like fantasy, nonfiction, children? Is it spread out, or is there like a leaning or a preference to one or the other?
It's definitely spread out. I used to not be into memoirs, but there's too many good authors out there. Like,
How would you
Something
describe a
weird.
memoir for people not familiar with the term? Like,
it's just your life written. Well, you can be specific categories. Like I told you, I'm doing a specific cult category memoir, or you
Yeah.
could just do your life. Like Alice Wong is just doing her life as an advocate. Maybe later in time, I'll do a different memoir. But for now, for educational purposes, because to me, that's so important, I'm doing that one because even there's not enough education. In Medium, I try to write as many articles and reach as many people as possible, as I'm also writing my books and plot twist children's series on YouTube. But yeah.
So I think, Diego, it's time for some overrated, underrated. Basically, we throw something at Jessie and she tells us it's overrated or it's underrated and why. You can also say it's properly rated, of course. You can go into detail, but you don't have to necessarily. Diego, do you want to go first or you want me to go first?
I think we can let the audience go first.
Okay, sure.
And
let's pop in overrated, underrated.
an
From our...
overrated under from the audience is audiobooks, underrated or overrated?
Underrated.
Yeah. Okay, that was an easy one. I'm gonna throw one out with a double entendre, just for the fun of it. The color purple, underrated or overrated?
It's underrated. I love the color purple.
And for me, The Alchemist. Is that
Overrated.
overrated or underrated?
Overrated. Automatically overrated.
I actually share that
read
opinion.
book.
Yeah.
It was on my reading list so long, and once I read it, like, okay, that was it. Yeah, I share that sentiment.
I unfortunately cannot agree with you both because it relates to me a lot, and it's also one of the reasons why I'm with my wife. So I don't have the same experience with it, but that's also because there's a very personal relationship between the book and my wife doesn't like Paulo Coelho the way I do, but for me personally, that book played a very important part in my life. So that's interesting, but I can totally accept it that in general that book's overrated, definitely. um, yeah, I'm gonna switch it up. I'm gonna ask the same question, but this time I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. Purple as a color, overrated or underrated?
As a color.
Yeah, purple
Still
as a color.
underrated. I feel underrated.
All right, and then I got one more. Um, I got one interesting here. Ready Player One, overrated or underrated? The movie and the book. If you had
Movie
to-
and book.
Yeah.
That's hard. because the movie's underrated and the book is overrated then to me.
Interesting. I was expecting the other way around.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So to elaborate a little bit, what makes the movie underrated?
There's not enough hype about it. Like I could literally rewatch the movie 100 times, and I listened to the book on audiobook because I do audio too. I don't do just physical book, and I don't just do Kindle. But I listened to the entire book, Ready Player One. I do have Ready Player Two on my audio, which I will Audible, which I'll eventually listen to. I just want to get through some other ones first. But there's like more sex talk in the actual book itself, and it has nothing to do with the storyline. I even was through that chapter like, why did the author write that in here? It makes no sense. It has nothing to do with anything. It's just teenage boy hormones of almost 2 full chapters of it. Like you could have put so much more background and ideas to the character that I just kept going, why? I don't understand this. It could have been such a great book if you just didn't add a chapter and a half. Okay, maybe a half a chapter if you really feel a need to put that in there, but an entire chapter and then a half just about that, about fantasies. You should just made it a porno book at that point because that's what it was becoming. And at least with the movie, you focus on the storyline. And no movie will ever be able to fit the full book in, but they did a great job of fitting what they could in that.
Yeah, because usually when they film something, that's the tall order, right? How do you, because within a book written form, the writers can basically write out what's playing behind the person's motives, their thought processes, whereas on the big screen, you just see the action, the result of. So that's why I thought it was interesting that you kind of flipped those two around. Quite interesting.
Well, if it's good, it's good. If it's not, it's not.
So Jessi, before we close off, quickly.
We got one more from the crowd.
Oh, we got one more. Okay, yeah, I'm not gonna read that one, Diego. If you want to do that one, go ahead.
Okay, last one from the crowd is manga, overrated or underrated?
I feel like it's underrated, honestly, just because, yes, there's people out there that read it. I personally haven't read it, but I have family members that do or have. And I think it's a good system. It's a good educational system. And yeah, there are sex ones of that. I'm aware of that. I grew up around it, but I think it's underrated.
Right.
Okay. Interesting. No, see, now that's why I wanted to do follow-up questions, but we're not gonna do follow-up questions about that topic. I just wanted to know, Jessi, and I think everybody wants to know. So now, Colorless is out. Where can people get it? If people are interested in purchasing your books, how can they get them, and how can they get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more or connecting with you?
You can go directly to Amazon. It weirdly enough has you write my name, so JESSIHERSEY, and then you write Colorless, or you can write Colorless first and then my name, and it should take you directly to the page. I'll send you guys the link to plug it in there if you need it. And it should take you. Right now, I only have the Kindle version out. The actual physical book should be out within a couple days to a week, depending on Amazon, honestly. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can go directly on TikTok and just press the email button and you'll get in direct contact with me right away. Or if you just want to send a tweet, I'm on Twitter at Jessi. Yeah, there's my TikTok handle. You can find me there. You can talk to me on any social media platform. I always have my inbox open, so it's never closed. I've had people reach out, so if it's someone who's creepy, I will absolutely block you. But if you're someone genuinely questioning or looking for answers or interested in my services, then yes, I will absolutely be here for you and ready to talk. But yeah.
Awesome. And of course, one more question. What can people look out for? What's in store for 2023?
My memoir and my YA, my young adult book, and the second one to Super Guy. When they will be out, I have no idea because I've only begun literally the first chapter of my memoir and the first chapter of my my young adult book, but Super Gay, the second one, is pretty much almost fully written. So that will be at some point in 2023. I don't know when, but some point in 2023.
Well, the important thing is that people can look forward to more stories from Jessi.
Yes. And a children's TV series. A Patreon page will be built for that.
Oh
I don't know
wow!
when that's coming, but I guess that's in 2023 also. I already have my animation artist, and we've been collaborating behind the scenes for over a year now.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Awesome. With that being said, we appreciate you coming on, Jessi, and especially sharing your story and, especially the part on educating children with special needs and the importance of, showing that empathy and understanding that everyone has a different way of, learning. And yeah, it's just different. There's no good or bad, and we need to more of that in the world. That mutual understanding uh, between people. With that being said, Jean-Luc, any closing words, and then you can roll us out.
Yes, of course, Jesse. So much. Thank you so much for being our guest. It was a very fun episode, a very educational as well. We want to thank you for being our guest. We want to thank you, those listening to the live broadcast. Thank you for tuning in. And of course, as always, Social Confoes will be available on all streaming platforms. This was Social Confoes. See you back next week. Bye bye.
Thank you guys.